The war horn had not sounded, but Warren Shelby's hand still froze mid-swing when he saw 6 orcs ride out of the tree line toward his half-built wall, and the townsfolk behind him began reaching for pitchforks and hunting bows before a single word had been spoken. He set down his mallet slowly, chalk dust and stone grit still clinging to his forearms, and stepped in front of the low scaffold where 3 of his apprentices had gone pale as birch bark. The lead rider was a woman, and even at a distance, even through the driving gray light of a Frostgate hollow morning, Warren felt something in his chest tighten that had nothing to do with fear. She sat her horse like she owned the wind itself, tusks catching the weak sunlight, green-gray skin marked with old scars that told stories he did not yet know, her black hair bound back in a thick braid threaded with small bones and copper rings. She wore fitted leathers, dark and oiled, laced tight up a strong torso, and cinched at a narrow waist before flaring over powerful thighs built for riding and fighting both, a curved long knife strapped to one hip, and a war axe slung across her back. She looked like something carved out of the mountain itself and given breath. "Which of you is Warren Shelby?" she called out, her voice carrying easily over the wind, deep and rough as river stone. "The man who owns Ember Ridge." The crowd that had gathered near the well site shifted uneasily, muttering the word orc like a curse, some already backing toward the town gate. Warren did not back away. He wiped his palms on his leather apron and walked forward until he stood at the edge of the unfinished wall, close enough that she reined her horse in only a few paces from him. "I am," he said, "and you are standing on land that belongs to me, not the crown, not the reeve, and not your clan." She swung down off her horse in one smooth motion that made more than one townsman flinch, and Warren had to fight the urge to step back himself, not from fear, but because up close she was even more striking than she had been at a distance, sharp golden eyes fixed on him like she meant to peel him apart and understand every layer. "Zarkha Fireblood," she said, planting a leather coin pouch heavy enough to clink against the low stone wall he had been building. "I have come to buy Ember Ridge from you. Name your price." Warren looked at the pouch, then back at her face, and something in him, some stubborn root that had never once bent to threats, held firm even as half the town watched with breath held. "It is not for sale," he said. A murmur went through the gathered crowd, some of it relief, some of it something uglier, whispers about orc raiders and stolen cattle and the war their grandfathers had fought. Zarkha's jaw tightened, and for a moment Warren thought she might simply take what she wanted, the way soldiers and reevemen alike had been doing to this town for 2 winters running. Instead she stepped closer, close enough that he could see the fine details of the scar along her collarbone, close enough to smell wood smoke and leather and something like pine sap in her hair. "You have not heard my price," she said. "I will double it, triple it. My clan needs high, dry ground before the first heavy snow, and Ember Ridge has your spring and your view of the pass. We have been driven from 3 camps in 2 months by the reeve's men and his hunting dogs. We need that ground, stonemason, and I intend to have it." "Then you will be disappointed," Warren said, and though his heart hammered, his voice stayed level. "That ridge was my father's. He is buried on it. I dug his grave myself with my own 2 hands the winter before last, and I will not sell the ground he sleeps in to anyone, orc or lord or king, for any pile of coin you can carry." For the first time since she had ridden into view, something shifted behind Zarkha Fireblood's golden eyes, not anger, but a flicker of surprise, as though she had expected fear or greed and found neither. "Then your father was a fool to be buried on land your neighbors will covet," she said, but there was less heat in it now. "Maybe," Warren said, "but it is mine to keep foolish or not." Behind him, one of the townsmen, a broad-shouldered man named Garrick who ran the smithy, stepped forward with a pitchfork half raised. "You heard him, orc. Get back on your horse and ride off before we make you." Zarkha did not so much as glance at him, her eyes still locked on Warren's, but her hand drifted unhurried to the axe at her back, and the crowd went still as death. "Enough," Warren said sharply, turning halfway so he stood between Garrick and Zarkha both, one hand raised toward each of them. "Nobody is raising a weapon here. Garrick put that down. She rode in peaceful, and she will ride out peaceful, and if any man in this town so much as knocks an arrow, he will answer to me before he answers to her. The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Garrick lowered the pitchfork, muttering, and the crowd slowly began to disperse, though not without backward glances and low words that Warren did not need to hear clearly to understand. Zarkha watched the whole exchange with an unreadable expression, and when the square had mostly emptied, she looked back at Warren with something almost like respect warring with frustration on her face. "You are either very brave or very stupid, stonemason," she said. "Probably both," Warren admitted, "but I still will not sell you that ridge." Then we are at an impasse. She crossed her arms, the leather of her sleeves creaking. "My people will freeze on low ground come the next big snow, and low ground is all the reeve has left us. I do not have the luxury of impasse." Warren studied her for a long moment, the stubborn set of her shoulders, the exhaustion beneath her fierce expression that spoke of weeks of hard travel and harder decisions, and something in him, the same instinct that made him careful with stone so it would not crack under the wrong pressure, told him there was more give in this woman than she was letting show. "I will not sell," he said slowly, "but I did not say I would not trade." That caught her attention fully, her arms uncrossing, gaze sharpening. "I am building a well for this whole town," Warren went on, gesturing at the half-raised stone wall behind him, "and a defensive wall to go with it, because the reeve has been so busy squeezing tax gold out of every household that not a soul here can afford proper protection, and winter raiders do not care whether you are orc or human when they are hungry. I need strong backs and steady hands to haul stone from the quarry 2 miles north, more than these frightened farmers can spare me. Your people look like they know hard work." Zarkha's brow lifted, somewhere between insult and interest. "You want to trade my warriors' labor for a patch of ground. I want to trade a season of quarry work for a season's grazing and camping rights on the ridge," Warren said. "Not the deed, not the grave, but the flat ground below it, the spring water, and the shelter of the tree line, for as long as your clan needs it, sealed proper and legal so no reeve or lord can tear it up on a whim." For a long moment Zarkha said nothing, studying him with those sharp golden eyes as though weighing the offer against 100 old grievances, 100 broken human promises. "Legal," she repeated finally, tasting the word like it might be poison. "You mean sealed at some keep, with a lord's wax and a lord's signature." "I mean sealed properly," Warren said, "so it cannot be undone the moment it is convenient for someone with more soldiers than sense." Something like a humorless laugh escaped her. "You do not know the reeve well if you think a wax seal will stop Corlath Vane from taking what he wants." "I know him well enough," Warren said grimly. "He has been bleeding this town dry for 2 years, taxing grain we do not have to spare, timber we need for our own roofs, coin most families have not seen since before the frost. If there is a way to put something down in ink that he cannot simply burn, I want it as much as you do." Zarkha looked at him for a long moment, something shifting behind her eyes, calculation giving way slowly to something warmer. "You are an unusual man, Warren Shelby." "So I have been told," he said, and for the first time the corner of her mouth twitched upward, not quite a smile, but close enough to make his pulse quicken in a way that had nothing to do with the standoff they had just survived. They struck the bargain there in the half-finished square, with the last of the townsfolk watching from doorways and shuttered windows, though Warren insisted the terms be written properly before either of them, said it was settled, and Zarkha insisted on inspecting the quarry herself before she would commit a single warrior's back to the labor. It was, Warren thought as he watched her ride off with her small band toward the tree line, the strangest and most promising morning he had had in longer than he cared to remember. 3 days later, true to her word, Zarkha returned, this time with a dozen of her clan's strongest warriors and no weapons drawn, and Warren spent that first week learning that orcish backs could haul more stone in a morning than 3 human teams combined, that Zarkha herself worked harder than any of them. stripped down to a sleeveless underlayer beneath her leathers, as she hauled granite blocks up from the quarry floor with ropes wound around her forearms. Muscles standing out sharp under green-gray skin slick, with sweat despite the cold. He found himself watching her more than was strictly necessary for a foreman overseeing labor, found himself making excuses to walk the quarry line just to hear her laugh, low and rough, when one of her warriors dropped a chisel on his own boot, found himself lingering at the fire pit each evening long after the work was done, trading stories with a woman he had been ready to run off his land only a week before. It was on the 5th evening, with the quarry crew gathered around a communal fire, and Zarkha seated across from him with a bowl of stew balanced on one knee, that the game began, though neither of them called it that at first. "You flinched," Zarkha said, watching him closely as he took another bite of the stew her people had made, thick with some root vegetable and dried meat that had a smoky bite to it he was not expecting. "That is orc pepper brew. Most humans cannot finish a bowl without weeping." "I am not most humans," Warren said, though his eyes were already watering. "Prove it. Finish the bowl without a single tear, and I will believe you," Zarkha said, a challenge glinting in her golden eyes, the firelight throwing warm shadows across the sharp planes of her face. Warren, against every ounce of good sense, finished the bowl, eyes streaming the entire time while her warriors roared with laughter and pounded the ground, and Zarkha herself laughed so hard she had to set her own bowl aside, wiping at her eyes. "You are a stubborn fool," she said, still grinning, "but I did not say you would enjoy proving it." "Fair is fair," Warren managed, throat burning. "My turn. I dare you to sing something from your clan, something old." She arched a brow at him. "That is a poor dare, stonemason. I sing well." "Then it should be easy for you," he shot back, and something delighted flickered across her face before she obliged. Her voice, when she sang, low and rich and strange to his ears, an old orcish hunting song about a warrior chasing a spiritelk across frozen ground, and Warren found himself unable to look away from her throat as she sang, from the way the firelight caught the copper rings in her braid. It became, over the following nights, a kind of ritual between them, each dare a little bolder than the last, each one testing the boundary of what the other would risk. She dared him to climb the quarry wall in the dark, and he did it, scraping his palms raw but grinning the whole way down. He dared her to let one of the town children braid flowers into her warbride, and she suffered through it with poorly hidden amusement, while the boy's mother nearly fainted at the sight of an orc warrior sitting patiently on a stump surrounded by giggling children. She dared him to drink from the cold spring at midnight in only his shirt sleeves, and he dared her, in turn, to admit the real reason her clan had been pushed off 3 separate camps that season. That last dare made her go quiet for a long moment, the firelight flickering over features suddenly guarded. "Reeve Vane wants Fireblood land for himself," she said finally, voice low. "Not to farm it, not to settle it. He wants to sell mining rights to a southern lord for silver he pockets half of before it ever reaches the crown's treasury. My clan's grazing grounds sit atop old veins. He has been pushing us further and further from ancestral ground each season, claiming border disputes, claiming we raided caravans we never touched. Also he has caused to send soldiers and claim the land is forfeit. That is the same man taxing half this town into starvation," Warren said grimly. "Grain he claims is owed to the crown that never seems to reach any crown treasury I have heard of." "Then we share an enemy," Zarkha said, meeting his eyes across the fire, something fierce and steady passing between them. "Then we should make sure Ember Ridge is sealed tight before he thinks to claim that too," Warren said. It was Zarkha, 2 nights later, who told him the deadline had teeth. A rider from her clan's scouts had come in at dusk, breathless, reporting that Reeve Vane intended to file a crown claim on all unclaimed and disputed border land, north of Frostgate Hollow within the month, once the mountain passes cleared enough for his men to move freely. And Ember Ridge, technically bordering disputed territory, sat squarely within the lines he meant to draw. A private trade between us means nothing if he simply seizes the whole ridge by decree, Zarkha said, pacing before the fire, agitation in every line of her powerful frame. We need our arrangement recorded and sealed at Baron Wren's keep in Ashenmoor before Vane files his claim, or none of this matters. Ashenmoor is a fortnight's ride through the high passes this time of year, Warren said, doing the grim math in his head. Through wolf country, through avalanche country, with winter not yet done with us. Then we had best leave within the week, Zarkha said, because I have buried enough of my people in bad ground to know what happens if we wait too long. Warren looked at her, at the fierce determination in her face, and felt the shape of the decision settle over him like a weight he did not resent carrying. I am the one who owns the ridge, he said. The Baron's clerks will want my seal on the grant regardless. I am coming with you. You are a stonemason, not a soldier, Zarkha said, though something in her voice had gone softer. I am also stubborn, Warren said, echoing her own words back at her, and for the first time she smiled at him fully, unguarded, and it hit him harder than any blow he had taken in the quarry. They left 5 days later with a small party, 2 of Zarkha's most trusted warriors, a pack-horse loaded with supplies, and a folded parchment describing the terms of their trade that Warren had drafted himself in careful, patient script by lamplight the night before. The town watched them go with a mixture of hope and suspicion, some offering quiet blessings, others muttering about fools who trusted orcs with their futures, and Warren tried not to let either weigh on him too heavily as the gates of Frostgate Hollow closed behind them, and the long white road north opened up. The first days of the journey passed in hard, cold silence broken only by the crunch of hooves on frozen ground and the occasional low conversation between Zarkha's warriors, a woman named Ushka with a scarred lip, and a man named Bragan who watched Warren with open suspicion that only slowly began to thaw as he proved himself capable of pulling his own weight, setting camp, mending harness leather, and enduring the cold without complaint. It was on the 4th night, camped in the shelter of a rocky outcrop with a fire burning low against the wind, that the dares resumed, though the stakes had shifted in a way that made Warren's pulse quicken every time Zarkha looked at him across the flames. I dare you, she said, voice pitched low so only he could hear over the wind, to tell me why you have not taken a wife, stonemason, a man who stands his ground against orc raiders and reavermen alike, and yet you live alone. Warren was quiet for a long moment, poking at the fire with a stick, feeling the old ache of it rise up before he pushed it back down. I built things, he said finally. Walls, wells, foundations for other people's homes. Never quite got around to building one for myself. Folks in Frostgate Hollow are kind enough, but they see a stonemason, not a man they want their daughters walking out with. I suppose I never minded much until lately. Until lately, Zarkha repeated, watching him with an intensity that made the cold night feel suddenly much warmer. My turn, Warren said, throat tight. I dare you to tell me why a warrior as fierce as you has never taken a mate. Surely your clan does not lack for warriors eager to court Zarkha Fireblood. Something flickered across her face, old hurt beneath the fierce exterior. Orc warriors court strength with strength, she said. They want a mate who will bring honor in battle, more warriors to the clan, alliances worth boasting of. I have turned down 3 offers this past year alone because none of them wanted me, not truly. They wanted what I could bring them. She looked at him then, steady and unflinching. You are the first man, orc or human, who has looked at me like he simply wanted me. The admission hung in the cold air between them, and Warren felt something crack open in his chest, warm and terrifying all at once. I dare you, he said, voice rougher than he intended, to let me kiss you. Zarkha's golden eyes widened slightly, and for a heartbeat he feared he had overstepped, gone too far, broken whatever fragile thing had been building between them over stew bowls and stolen glances. Then she leaned across the space between them, closing the distance herself, one strong hand coming up to cup the side of his face with surprising gentleness. "That is not a dare I need convincing to accept," she murmured and kissed him. It was not gentle, not at first, hungry and searching in a way that stole the breath from his lungs, her hand fisting in the front of his coat to drag him closer. And Warren kissed her back with everything he had, months of loneliness and longing pouring into a single desperate meeting of mouths beside a dying campfire in the middle of frozen nowhere. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Zarkha rested her forehead against his, a low, satisfied rumble in her chest that he felt more than heard. "I have wanted to do that since you finished that bowl of pepper brew without complaint," she admitted against his lips. "I have wanted you to do that since you rode into Frostgate Hollow and slammed a coin pouch on my wall," Warren said, and her laugh, warm and real, was the best sound he had heard in years. They traveled closer after that night, sharing a bedroll for warmth that had nothing to do with the cold and everything to do with neither of them wanting to be apart, trading soft touches and quiet words that Ushka and Bragan pretended not to notice, though the knowing looks they exchanged said otherwise. The dares continued, gentler now, more intimate, dares to share the last of the dried fruit, to trade stories of their dead fathers, to simply sit pressed together against the cold and admit, in low voices under the stars, how thoroughly and unexpectedly they had come to matter to one another. The danger of the road did not lessen for their happiness, though. On the 7th day, crossing a narrow shelf of trail along a frozen ravine, a pack of starving winter wolves caught their scent, and Warren found himself flat on his back in the snow with a wolf's jaws snapping inches from his throat before Zarkha's war axe took the beast clean off him, her powerful frame a blur of motion as she fought off two more with Ushka and Bragan at her flanks, blood and snow flying until the pack, thinned and wary, finally retreated into the tree line. Warren lay in the snow afterward, chest heaving, staring up at Zarkha as she knelt over him, checking him for wounds with hands that trembled slightly despite her fierce composure. "You are not allowed to die on me, stonemason," she said, voice rough with something that was not quite anger. "Not before I have had my fill of you." "I will try to arrange that," Warren managed, and she kissed him hard enough to bruise, right there in the snow with wolf blood still on her axe, and he understood in that moment that whatever this was between them, it was no passing thing born of a bargain over land. It was something neither of them had expected to find, and neither of them intended to let go. It was 2 days later, arriving at the small waypost town of Hollow Bridge to resupply and shelter from an incoming storm, that Warren's world tilted sideways in a way that had nothing to do with wolves or weather. Hollow Bridge was smaller than Frostgate Hollow, a cluster of stone and timber buildings clustered around a market square with a well at its center, and the moment their small party rode through the gate, Warren felt the temperature of the welcome drop, several degrees colder than the weather alone accounted for. Word of orc raiders on the eastern trade road had apparently reached the town days before, some caravan robbed and burned, and though Zarkha and her people had been nowhere near it, the sight of orc warriors riding through the gate was enough to set the whole square on edge. By the time they had reached the well to water their horses, a crowd had gathered murmuring, and Warren felt the mood shift from wary to hostile faster than he could account for. "That is her," a woman's voice rang out, shrill with fear or fury. Warren could not tell which. "That is the one who led the raid on the Ashwood caravan. I saw her from the ridge, that same axe, that same braid." "That is a lie," Zarkha said sharply, but the crowd was already surging closer, faces twisted with a fear that had curdled into something uglier, someone hefting a length of firewood like a club, another reaching for a torch from the nearby brazier. "Orc filth," a man spat, shoving forward. "String her up before she guts us all in our sleep." Warren did not think. He simply moved, placing himself bodily between Zarkha and the advancing crowd, arms spread wide, heart hammering so hard he could feel it in his throat. "Nobody is stringing anyone up," he said, voice carrying with a firmness he did not entirely feel. This woman has been at my side for the last week straight, working my quarry, riding this road with me. She was nowhere near your caravan. Get out of the way, Mason, unless you want what she is coming, the man with the torch snarled, and behind him the crowd pressed closer. A dozen faces twisted with fear and old hatred, someone throwing a stone that clipped Warren's shoulder hard enough to make him stagger. I said get back. Warren roared, and something in his voice, raw and furious, made the front of the crowd hesitate. Zarkha's hand closed around his arm, trying to pull him aside. Warren, this is not your fight. Let me handle this my own way. No, he said, not moving, planting his feet even as another stone flew past his head. I did not drag you 2 weeks through wolf country and frozen passes to watch a mob burn you over a lie. If you want to hurt her, you will have to go through me first. The crowd faltered, murmuring uncertainly, and it was in that suspended moment, mob fury and Warren's stubborn defiance hanging in balance, that an older woman pushed through the front ranks, gray-haired, sharp-eyed, wearing the chain of office that marked her as the town's reeve-appointed magistrate. Enough, she barked, voice cutting through the noise like a whip crack. I said enough, you fools. Put down that torch before you burn down half the square. She rounded on the man who had first accused Zarkha, jabbing a finger at his chest. Dobbin Ash, you were not anywhere near the Ashwood Road when that caravan burned. You heard it third hand from your cousin's drunk friend, and I will not have this town committing murder over tavern gossip. The crowd's fury seemed to deflate all at once, torches lowering, stones dropping from hands that suddenly looked uncertain and ashamed. The magistrate turned to Zarkha and Warren both, her sharp eyes assessing them with a wariness that had not entirely vanished, but had cooled considerably. You will want to be gone from my town before nightfall, she said, not unkindly, for your own safety as much as anything, but you will not be strung up in my market square today. That much I can promise. Warren felt the tension drain out of him all at once, his knees nearly buckling with the release of it, and Zarkha's hand found his, gripping tight, her golden eyes wide with something raw and grateful when he finally turned to look at her. You could have been killed, she said quietly, once they were away from the square, sheltering in the small stable where they had left their horses, her hands framing his face, checking the bruise blooming on his shoulder where the stone had struck him. You stood in front of a mob for me. I would do it again, Warren said, and meant it with every fiber of his being. You matter to me, Zarkha, more than I know how to say properly. I'm not going to stand aside and watch people hurt you over lies and fear. She kissed him then, fierce and desperate, hands fisting in his coat, and when she finally pulled back, her forehead resting against his, her voice was rough with an emotion he had never heard from her before. No one has ever done that for me, she admitted. Not once in all my years. My own clan expects me to fight my own battles, to prove strength on my own. You stood between me and a mob with nothing but words and stubbornness, and you did not even hesitate. I told you, Warren murmured against her lips. I did not hesitate because there was nothing to hesitate over. You matter more to me than my own skin. They left Hollow Bridge before dark as the magistrate had suggested, riding hard for several miles until the storm that had been threatening finally broke, forcing them to take shelter in the ruins of an old watchtower half collapsed into the hillside, its stone walls still sturdy enough to break the worst of the wind. Ushka and Bragan took first watch by unspoken agreement, leaving Warren and Zarkha alone in the tower's lower chamber with a small fire crackling against the cold. It was there, wrapped together against the storm's howl, the day's terror and fury finally bleeding out into something quieter and more tender, that the last of the careful distance between them dissolved entirely. Zarkha's hands were gentle as they traced the bruise on his shoulder, gentle as they undid the laces of his coat, and Warren found himself trembling not from cold, but from the overwhelming weight of being wanted so completely by a woman who could have chosen anyone, who had faced down wolves and mobs alike without flinching, and who looked at him now like he was the only steady ground she had ever found. Tell me you want this, she murmured against his throat, voice rough with need but careful, giving him every chance to say otherwise. Tell me this is not the fear talking, or the fire, or the cold. I have wanted you since you slammed that coin pouch on my wall and dared me to say no, Warren said, voice unsteady with feeling. I want you more now than I have ever wanted anything in my life. What followed was slow and warm despite the storm raging outside the broken tower walls, tender in a way that spoke louder than any words could of how thoroughly they had each come to matter to the other. Firelight throwing gold across green-gray skin and weathered human hands both, until the cold and the fear and the long hard road all fell away, and there was only the two of them, finally, entirely, given over to each other. Afterward, wrapped together beneath their shared furs with the fire burned down to embers, Zarkha pressed a kiss to his temple and murmured something low in her own tongue that Warren did not understand but felt, somehow, in the marrow of his bones. "What does that mean?" he asked softly. "It means you are mine now," she said, "and I am yours if you will have me, past this trade, past this ridge, past whatever the Baron says or Vane threatens. I have never said those words to anyone, Warren Shelby. I do not intend to take them back. I will have you," Warren said, throat tight with feeling, "for as long as you will let me." They reached the outskirts of Ashenmoor 4 days later, the great stone keep rising up out of the frozen hills like a gray tooth against the white sky, banners snapping in the wind above its battlements. Warren had never seen a keep so large, so imposing, and he felt suddenly very small and very much a stonemason as they approached the gates, Zarkha riding at his side with her chin held high despite the wary looks the keep's guards gave her. They were made to wait 3 full days for an audience with Baron Aldrich Wren, 3 days of tense uncertainty in the keep's crowded lower hall, and it was on the morning of the 4th day, just as they were finally ushered into the Baron's presence, that Warren's stomach dropped at the sight of a familiar figure already standing before the Baron's high seat. Reeve Corlath Vane was a lean, sharp-featured man in fine furs that Warren knew, with bitter certainty, had been paid for with tax gold squeezed from families who could not afford bread, and his cold eyes flicked over Warren and Zarkha both with undisguised contempt as they entered. "Baron Wren," Vane was saying smoothly, "as I was explaining, the borderlands north of Frostgate Hollow have long been a haven for orc raiders preying on honest trade caravans. It is in the Crown's interest, and in the interest of every human settler in the region, that these lands be brought under proper Crown authority before the spring thaw allows further raids." "That is a lie," Warren said before he could stop himself, stepping forward despite the guard's sharp looks. "My Lord Baron, that man has been squeezing Frostgate Hollow dry for 2 years running, taxing grain and timber that never reaches your treasury, and now he means to seize border land that rightfully belongs to Fireblood clan grazing grounds and my own family homestead. Also, he can sell mining rights to some southern lord for his own pocket." Baron Wren, a heavy-set man with tired eyes and a graying beard, studied Warren for a long moment before his gaze shifted to Zarkha. "And you are the orc woman I have heard mentioned in this dispute, Zarkha of Fireblood clan." "I am," Zarkha said, standing tall and unflinching despite the weight of every eye in the hall. "My Lord Baron, Reeve Vane has driven my clan from 3 separate camps in as many months on false claims of raiding, claims that were never proven because they were never true. We seek only fair, sealed rights to camp on Ember Ridge, land this man," she gestured to Warren, "has agreed to trade in exchange for honest labor, nothing more." Vane's lip curled. "You would take the word of a raider over the Crown's appointed reeve, my lord." "I would take the word of a man who built half the walls and wells in this barony over a reeve whose tax ledgers, when last audited, showed grain shipments that never arrived at any Crown storehouse I am aware of," Baron Wren said dryly, and Warren felt a flicker of hope kindle in his chest at the sharp look the Baron gave Vane. "I have had my own suspicions about your accounting for some time, Reeve Vane. Perhaps it is time my clerks took a closer look at your ledgers before I approve any new land claims on your say-so." Vane's composure cracked for just a moment, something ugly and desperate flashing across his face before he smoothed it over. "My lord, surely you do not mean to take the word of an orc and a common stonemason over. I mean to take the word of the evidence before me," Baron Wren said, voice hardening. "Warren Shelby, do you have the terms of this trade in writing?" Warren stepped forward and produced the folded parchment from inside his coat, hands steady despite the pounding of his heart, and passed it up to the Baron's waiting clerk. The Baron read it over carefully, his expression unreadable, while veins shifted from foot to foot beside him with poorly hidden agitation. "This seems straightforward enough," Baron Wren said finally. "A trade of seasonal labor for seasonal camping rights, the land title itself remaining with Warren Shelby. I see no reason not to seal this as binding, provided Reeve Vane has no evidence of actual wrongdoing on the part of Fireblood clan." "I have witnesses," Vane began. "Then produce them," Baron Wren said flatly. "Here before me today, or admit you have none and that this has been about the mineral rights beneath that ridge all along." The silence that followed stretched long and damning, Vane's face going pale and then red with barely suppressed fury, until finally, with no witnesses to produce and no evidence to offer, he was forced into a stiff, furious bow. "As my lord wishes," he bit out, and the look he shot Warren and Zarkha both on his way out of the hall promised this was far from over. Baron Wren sealed the grant with his own wax and signature that same afternoon, binding Ember Ridge's grazing and camping rights to Fireblood clan for as long as Warren Shelby held the deed, a document that no Reeve, present or future, could simply tear up on a whim. Warren felt something like disbelief and joy warring in his chest as he watched the wax cool, Zarkha's hand tight in his own. "It is done," she murmured, staring at the sealed parchment like she could not quite believe it. "After everything, it is actually done." "It is done," Warren agreed, and when she turned to him, eyes bright with an emotion too large for words, he kissed her right there in the Baron's hall, heedless of the guards and clerks watching, and for once she did not seem to care either. They left Ashenmore the next morning with the sealed grant carefully wrapped and stowed, but their relief was short-lived. 2 days into the return journey, cutting through a narrow mountain pass to save time before the next storm rolled in, Bragan's sharp eyes caught movement on the ridgeline above them, and within moments, a dozen armed riders wearing Reeve Vane's colors came thundering down the slope, blocking the trail ahead and behind. "Vane means to take that grant back by force before we ever reach Frostgate Hollow," Zarkha snarled, already reaching for her axe as Warren's heart hammered with dread. "There is no grant to take," a voice called out, and Vane himself rode forward from among his men, face twisted with cold fury. "There will be an unfortunate incident, a raid gone wrong, and no grant to speak of once you are all dead in this pass, and the parchment burned with your bodies." "You will hang for this," Warren said, positioning himself protectively at Zarkha's side even as Ushka and Bragan fanned out to cover their flanks. "I will hang for nothing," Vane said. "There will be no witnesses." The fight that followed was fast and brutal, Vane's men outnumbering their small party nearly 3-1, but Zarkha fought like something out of legend, her axe a blur of motion as she cut down one rider after another. And Warren, though no warrior, used every trick a stonemason knew about leverage and wait to bring down a charging horseman with a well-placed rope and a rolled boulder that sent both horse and rider tumbling. Ushka took an arrow to the shoulder but fought on regardless, and Bragan's spear found its mark twice before the tide of the battle began, slowly, to turn. It was Zarkha in the end who faced down Vane himself, their weapons crossing in a shower of sparks in the narrow pass, and Warren watched with his heart in his throat as she drove the Reeve back step by step, fury and years of grievance behind every strike, until Vane stumbled on the icy ground and she had her axe at his throat. "Yield," she snarled, "or die here in this pass exactly as you meant for us to." Vane, pale and shaking, dropped his sword into the snow. "I yield," he gasped. "I yield, do not kill me. Give me one good reason," Zarkha growled. Because the Baron already has grounds to try you for corruption, and now for attempted murder both, Warren said, stepping up beside her, breathing hard from the fight but steady on his feet. Let him live, Zarkha. Let him hang properly by law in front of the same people he has been bleeding dry for 2 years. That is a better justice than anything your axe can give him here. Zarkha held the blade at Vane's throat a moment longer, golden eyes blazing, before she finally, reluctantly, lowered it. Fine, she said. The law can have him, but if he so much as breathes wrong on the ride back, I will finish what I started. They delivered Reeve Vane in chains to Baron Wren's keep 3 days later, along with the testimony of his own surviving men, several of whom were only too eager to confess the whole scheme in exchange for leniency. And Baron Wren, true to his word, ordered a full audit of Vane's tax ledgers that confirmed years of theft and extortion. Vane was stripped of his title and sentenced to hard labor in the very quarries he had once taxed into ruin, a fitting justice that brought Warren no small measure of grim satisfaction. With Vane gone and the sealed grant secure, the return to Frostgate Hollow felt like coming home in a way Warren had not expected, the town gates opening to welcome them with a warmth that had been entirely absent the day Zarkha first rode in demanding to buy his land. Word of the confrontation with Vane's men had traveled ahead of them somehow, and the townsfolk who had once eyed Zarkha with suspicion now watched her with something closer to grudging respect, some even offering quiet thanks for the Reeve's downfall. The following weeks passed in a flurry of building, both literal and otherwise, as Warren finished the town well and defensive wall with the continued help of Fireblood clan warriors, and Zarkha's people began raising their hide tents on the flat ground below Ember Ridge, close enough to the spring that fresh water was never more than a short walk away. Warren spent his evenings now not alone in his small cottage, but up on the ridge itself, sitting beside his father's grave with Zarkha at his side, telling her stories of the man who had taught him to read stone and set foundation, and she in turn told him of her own mother, a warrior who had died defending Fireblood grazing grounds long before Vane had ever set his sights on them. It was there, on Ember Ridge, beneath a sky finally clearing of winter storm clouds, that Zarkha turned to him one evening with a small carved wooden token in her palm, the wood worked with careful, ancient symbols that Warren did not recognize but somehow understood the weight of regardless. This is a claiming token, she said, voice steadier than he had ever heard it, though her hands trembled slightly as she held it out. Among my people, when a warrior chooses a mate for life, not for convenience or alliance, but because they cannot imagine facing another season without them, they carve a token from wood taken from ground that matters to them both. I carved this from a branch of the old pine above your father's grave. Warren took the token from her palm with careful reverence, feeling the weight of it, the smoothness where her hands had worked the wood over many nights he had not known about. Zarkha. I am not finished, she said, though a smile was already tugging at her mouth. The tradition asks that I cut my palm and offer my blood mixed with yours, binding us before whatever gods or spirits watch over Fireblood clan if you are willing. I am not asking you to become Orc, Warren Shelby, only to let me claim you the way my people claim what matters most, fully, permanently, without reservation. I have never wanted anything more, Warren said, voice thick with emotion, and when she drew her small belt knife and made a shallow cut across her palm, he did not hesitate to offer his own hand in turn, wincing only slightly as she pressed the cut against his own, blood mingling between their joined palms while the wind carried the scent of pine and wood smoke across the ridge. Now you are mine, Zarkha said, voice rough with feeling, before any gods that care to witness it, and I am yours for every season we have left to us. I would not have it any other way, Warren said, and kissed her there on the ridge where his father slept, with her clan's fires burning warm in the valley below, and the whole wide, difficult, beautiful world stretched out around them. They were married properly a month later, in a ceremony that blended both their traditions in a way that made half of Frostgate Hollow weep and the other half cheer. Fireblood warriors standing shoulder to shoulder with human townsfolk beneath a canopy of pine boughs on Ember Ridge itself. Close enough to Warren's father's grave that Zarkha insisted a portion of the feast be set aside there in old custom, a gesture that moved Warren more than he could properly express. Life did not become easy, exactly in the seasons that followed, for a border town and an orc clan carving out a shared existence in hard northern country was never going to be without its trials, but it became something Warren had never quite dared to hope for in all his years of solitary stonework. His days were spent building still, walls and wells and now proper timber homes for Fireblood clan alongside the traditional hide tents, and his evenings were spent with Zarkha, always Zarkha, whether trading playful dares by the fire that still made her warriors laugh, or simply lying together beneath shared firs listening to the wind move across the ridge. On the first anniversary of the day she had ridden into Frostgate Hollow with a coin pouch and a demand, Warren found her standing alone on Ember Ridge at dusk, looking out over the valley where both their peoples now lived side by side in a fragile, hard-won peace. Hide tents and stone cottages, both catching the last golden light of a sun finally warm enough to promise spring. "I used to stand on ridges like this alone," Zarkha said quietly as he came to stand beside her, slipping an arm around her waist, "wondering if my clan would ever have solid ground to call our own again, wondering if I would ever have anything that was simply mine. And now?" Warren asked, resting his chin against her shoulder. "Now I have solid ground," she said, turning in his arms to face him fully, golden eyes bright with a warmth that still, after everything, made his heart ache with wanting her. "And I have you. I do not think I have ever in all my years felt less alone than I do standing here with you." "I feel exactly the same," Warren admitted, voice thick with feeling. "I spent so long building things for other people, homes and walls and wells that were never mine to keep. I never thought I would find someone who wanted to build something with me instead." "Then it is fortunate," Zarkha murmured, pulling him close, "that I have never once been interested in anything less than everything stonemason. Not the land, not a trade, all of it, all of you." And there on Ember Ridge, with the spring wind finally carrying the scent of thaw instead of frost, with his father's grave watching over the valley below, and her clan's fires burning steady in the dusk, Warren Shelby understood, fully and completely, that whatever loneliness he had carried through all those solitary years of laying stone for other men's homes had finally, truly, come to an end. He had found in the fiercest and most unexpected of women not just a wife, not just a partner in trade or in battle, but a home entire. And as Zarkha Fireblood kissed him beneath that darkening northern sky, he knew with absolute certainty that he would spend every remaining season of his life exactly here, exactly like this, exactly hers.